I retired, all I knew was defending my end zone.
I didn't know what to do. I always had my guard up.
Ready to tear someone's head off.
Then I stopped settling for safe-ish and got safe with ADT.
With 24/7 monitoring,
What's up, Brian?
I'm more relaxed than ever.
And I don't have my head on the swivel anymore. Oh, a black cat chickadee.
I had a whole defensive scheme to keep it safe-ish.
Woo! And safe-ish wasn't good enough. Oh, hey!
Hey, Bam Bam!
What's going on?
Because now when it comes to protecting my house, I use ADT. Coming through! No, not in my house!
Oh, a cat!
How does a quiet father go from being erased at his own daughter's party to sending a single envelope that changed her life forever? When I saw her friends dismiss me as the old man, I realized exactly how invisible I'd become and what power I still held. The moment she opened my envelope, everyone in the room finally understood what I had always known. The elevator shuddered to a halt between the 15th and 16th floors, trapping me in a metal box with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of my own thoughts. Douglas Carver, 58 years old, mid-level financial consultant, stuck like a relic in a machine that had simply stopped working. How fitting. I had been heading to Madeline's birthday celebration at the upscale downtown bar she'd chosen, Meridian Lounge, the kind of place where 24-year-olds went to feel important and order cocktails with names longer than their attention spans. I'd spent the morning carefully selecting a modest gift, a vintage leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover, something meaningful yet understated. The kind of gift a thoughtful father gives, not flashy enough to embarrass her in front of her friends, but personal enough to show I'd been listening when she mentioned wanting to start writing again. My phone buzzed against my chest pocket, then again, and again. Social media notifications. Madeline was active tonight, probably posting photos from her party. I smiled slightly, imagining her excitement, the way she'd light up when surrounded by friends and attention. Maybe she'd even post something about appreciating family, about looking forward to seeing her old man tonight. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. The first post hit me like a physical blow. A photo of Madeline laughing with her arms around two friends, cocktails raised in a toast. The caption read, "Looks like the old man changed his mind. Best decision ever. Birthday vibes, shack no regrets." My fingers went numb. The old man. That's what I was to her now. Not Dad, not Douglas, not even my name. Just the old man, who had apparently changed his mind about attending his own daughter's birthday party. But I hadn't changed my mind. I was literally in an elevator, trying to get to her. I scrolled down to the comments, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Brianna Foster, Madeline's best friend and constant companion, had replied first. "Ignore him. Keep dancing. This night is about you." 17 likes already. Then I saw Madeline's response to Brianna, posted just 3 minutes ago. Honestly, shouldn't have invited him in the first place. Major regret. But you're right. Tonight is mine. 23 likes. The elevator lurched back to life, but I remained frozen, staring at the screen. Other comments poured in from friends I'd known since Madeline was in high school, people I'd driven to soccer practice and birthday parties, young adults I'd helped with college applications and job interviews. Probably for the best. Old people ruin the atmosphere anyway. More fun without the parental supervision. Each comment felt like a small, precise cut, but it was Madeline's words that left me breathless. Shouldn't have invited him in the first place. Major regret. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the ground floor. The doors slid open, revealing the busy lobby of my office building. People rushing past in their Friday evening hurry to get somewhere important, somewhere they were wanted. I stepped out, but didn't move toward the exit. Instead, I stood there in the marble-floored lobby, watching the stream of people flow around me like water around a stone, invisible, irrelevant, a regret. My phone buzzed again, another notification. This time, a photo of Madeline and Brianna toasting with champagne flutes, both of them radiant with laughter. The caption, "Best night ever, no drama. Blessed life, perfect vibes. No drama." That's what my absence meant to her. No drama. I looked down at the gift bag in my hand, at the carefully chosen card with its handwritten message about how proud I was of the woman she'd become, how much I looked forward to celebrating this milestone with her. The words felt hollow now, like echoes in an empty room. The lobby's glass doors gleamed in front of me, reflecting my image back like a ghost. A 58-year-old man in a modest suit, holding a gift for someone who considered his presence a regret. I never reached the door. Instead, I turned around and walked back to the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet lobby. As the elevator carried me back up to the parking garage, I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors and felt something shift inside me, something cold and calculating, like the part of my brain that analyzed financial portfolios and risk assessments. For the first time in years, I began to see the situation clearly, not as a hurt father, but as a man who had been systematically erased from his own life, a man who had been taken for granted so completely that his own daughter celebrated his absence. But there was something Madeline didn't know, something none of them knew. In my quiet, methodical way, I had always been more than they realized, and sometimes the most devastating revelations come not from the loudest voices, but from the quietest ones. As I drove home through the city lights, my phone continued to buzz with notifications from Madeline's party. I didn't look at them. I had seen enough. My apartment felt different when I returned that night. Not just quiet. It had been quiet for months since Sylvia and I had separated, but charged with a new kind of energy. I set Madeline's unopened gift on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of the good scotch, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. The separation from Sylvia hadn't been dramatic. No screaming matches, no thrown dishes, no dramatic declarations. Just a slow, steady erosion of connection until we were two strangers sharing a mortgage and a daughter who had grown up to treat me like an inconvenient relative. "Maybe you should find your own place for a while," Sylvia had suggested 6 months ago, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she'd already made a decision and was simply informing me of it. "Give us both some space to think." Space to think. As if 24 years of marriage and raising Madeline together was something that required contemplation, like choosing a new car or deciding on a vacation destination. I had moved into this one-bedroom apartment without protest, taking only my clothes, my books, and the box of documents I kept in my home office. Sylvia had seemed relieved, and Madeline had barely acknowledged the change. "Whatever makes you both happy," she'd said with a shrug, not looking up from her phone. Now, sitting in my modest living room with its rented furniture and bare walls, I found myself thinking about patterns. In my work as a financial consultant, I'd learned to recognize them, small indicators that, when viewed collectively, revealed much larger truths about a person's financial behavior. The same principles applied to relationships. I opened my laptop and began scrolling through months of social media posts, text messages, and family photos. What I found was a systematic documentation of my own erasure. Madeline's graduation party last spring, dozens of photos with friends, family, even the catering staff, but none with me. I had been there, had helped pay for the event, had even given a toast that made her cry happy tears. But in the digital record of her achievement, I simply didn't exist. Her promotion at the marketing firm where she worked, celebration dinner photos with Sylvia, Brianna, and other friends. I had been invited to that dinner, had even made the reservation. But when the photos were posted, they were carefully cropped to exclude the chair where I'd been sitting. family gatherings at Sylvia's sister's house, group shots that somehow never included me, or if they did, I appeared at the very edge of the frame, half cut off, like an afterthought. The pattern was clear and deliberate. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being actively edited out of my own family's story. I closed the laptop and walked to the small closet where I kept my important documents. Behind the tax returns and insurance policies, I found the box I'd brought from the house. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in years: Madeline's birth certificate, hospital records from when she was born, and a manila folder labeled personal in my careful handwriting. 24 years ago, I had been working late when Sylvia called from the hospital. She was only 7 months pregnant, and the panic in her voice had sent me racing through traffic to get to her side. Madeline had been born premature, tiny and fragile, fighting for every breath in the NICU. I remembered sitting in that sterile waiting room, holding Sylvia's hand while she slept, staring through the glass at this impossibly small person who would become my daughter. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, but those first few weeks had been touch and go. I had taken leave from work, had spent every possible moment at the hospital, learning how to hold her properly, how to feed her, how to change diapers that seemed enormous on her bird-like frame. "She's lucky to have such a devoted father," one of the nurses had told me during a particularly difficult night when Madeline's breathing had been irregular. Not every man would be here every single day. But I wasn't just any man. I was her father. Or so I had believed. I pulled out a document I hadn't examined in over 2 decades, the paternity test I had requested when Madeline was 6 months old. Not because I doubted Sylvia, but because my insurance company had required it for some bureaucratic reason I could no longer remember. The results had been inconclusive. Not negative, but not definitively positive either. The technology had been less precise back then, and the lab had recommended retesting when Madeline was older. But by then, it hadn't mattered. I was already her father in every way that counted. I was the one who walked the floors with her when she had colic, who taught her to ride a bike, who helped her with homework, and attended every school play and soccer game. Biology had seemed irrelevant. But now, sitting in my quiet apartment with the evidence of my systematic erasure spread across my coffee table, I found myself wondering about that inconclusive test, about the timing of Madeline's birth, about certain conversations I'd overheard over the years, but had chosen to dismiss. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sylvia. "Madeline said you didn't make it to her party. She's disappointed. Maybe you could take her to lunch this week to make up for it." Disappointed. That was rich, considering the celebration of my absence I'd witnessed on social media. I typed back, "I was in an elevator when she posted that she was glad I'd changed my mind. Seemed like she was having more fun without me." The response came quickly. "Don't be dramatic, Douglas. You know how young people are with social media. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. 24 years of devotion, reduced to meaningless social media drama." I set the phone aside and returned to the documents. At the bottom of the box, I found something I'd forgotten about: a business card for a private investigation service I'd consulted years ago when I'd suspected one of my clients of financial fraud. The investigator, Patricia Hendricks, had been thorough and discreet. Perhaps it was time to get some answers about the questions I'd been too afraid to ask. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I opened my laptop again and began researching modern DNA testing services. The technology had advanced considerably since Madeline's infancy. Now, for less than $100, I could get definitive answers about paternity, genetic heritage, and biological relationships. As I filled out the online order form for a DNA test kit, my phone buzzed with another notification. Madeline had posted a new photo from her party, a group shot of her and her friends making exaggerated, pouty faces. The caption read, "When your dad flakes on your birthday but your real family shows up." Chosen family, birthday love, your real family. I stared at those words for a long moment, then clicked complete order on the DNA test website. It was time to find out who Madeline's real family actually was. The DNA test kit arrived on Tuesday, a small cardboard box that felt remarkably light for something that could potentially upend my entire understanding of my life. I set it on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker and stared at it while I ate breakfast, as if it might spontaneously reveal its secrets without requiring me to actually open it. At work that morning, I found myself distracted during client meetings, my mind wandering to questions I'd spent 24 years avoiding. My colleague, Janet Winters, noticed my preoccupation during our weekly portfolio review. "You seem a million miles away today, Doug," she said, closing her laptop and studying my face with the sharp attention that made her such a successful financial advisor. "Everything okay at home?" Home. What an interesting word choice, considering I no longer had a traditional home, just an apartment with rented furniture and a growing collection of unanswered questions. "Family stuff," I replied, which was both true and completely inadequate. Janet nodded knowingly. "Kids that age can be challenging. My daughter went through a phase where she acted like we were strangers. It passes. But this wasn't a phase, and I was beginning to understand that it never had been. This was a pattern that had been building for years, so gradually that I'd mistaken it for normal growing pains. During my lunch break, I drove to the bank where I'd been a customer for over 15 years. I needed to review some documents I had stored in my safety deposit box, papers I hadn't looked at since my father's passing 5 years ago. Richard Fenton had been a methodical man, much like me, but far more exacting when it came to safeguarding family assets. He had established the Carver Family Trust when I was in my 20s, long before Madeline was born, with very precise terms regarding inheritance and beneficiary rights. "The trust is designed to protect our family's wealth for future generations," he had explained when I first became a beneficiary, "but it requires direct biological descent. No exceptions, no loopholes. Lineage is the only thing that can't be forged or manipulated." At the time, his emphasis on biological heritage had seemed outdated, almost quaint. Why would it matter? But my father had come from a generation that understood the value of legal precision and unbreakable boundaries. Now, sitting in the bank's private viewing room with the trust documents spread out before me, I read the terms with fresh perspective. The language was unmistakably clear. Beneficiaries must be direct biological descendants of the trust's founder, Richard Fenton, verified through genetic testing if required. The trust was worth $2.8 million, built through decades of careful investments and steady compound growth. Madeline had always assumed she would receive it one day, just as I had received it from my father. She mentioned it casually over the years, talking about her future plans, the house she wanted to buy, and the places she wanted to see. But if she wasn't my biological daughter, I photographed the relevant pages with my phone and returned the documents to the safety deposit box. Then I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and called Patricia Hendricks, the private investigator whose business card I'd found the night before. "Patricia Hendricks Investigations," came the crisp, professional voice. "Ms. Hendricks, this is Douglas Carver. You helped me with a client matter about 3 years ago, financial fraud case." "Of course, Mr. Carver, I remember. What can I do for you?" "I need some background research done. Personal matter this time. Very discreet." "That's what I do. When would you like to meet?" An hour later, I was sitting in Patricia's office, a converted warehouse space in the arts district that managed to feel both modern and timeless. Patricia herself was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Tell me what you need," she said, opening a fresh notepad. I explained the situation carefully, sticking to facts rather than emotions. The timeline of Madeline's birth, the inconclusive paternity test from 24 years ago, my growing suspicions about my role in the family. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment. "Mr. Carver, I have to ask, are you prepared for any answer I might find? Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we expect." "I've been living with questions for 24 years, I replied. "I think I'm ready for answers." She nodded. "I'll need some basic information about your wife and daughter. Full names, dates of birth, any previous addresses you can remember from around the time of conception and birth." I provided what I could, surprised by how much I remembered about those early years when I'd been so completely invested in building our family. "There's something else," I said, hesitating. "If it turns out that I'm not Madeline's biological father, I'll need to know who is. For legal reasons." Patricia's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "Legal reasons related to inheritance?" "Among other things." "I understand. This type of investigation typically takes 2 to 3 weeks, depending on what we find. My rate is $150 per hour plus expenses." I wrote her a check for $2,000 as a retainer, money I could afford thanks to the careful financial planning that had characterized my entire adult life. As I handed it to her, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I was taking action instead of simply enduring. "One more thing," Patricia said, as I prepared to leave. "You mentioned that your daughter has been systematically excluding you from family events and social media. That kind of behavior sometimes indicates that she knows something, even if she's not consciously aware of it." "What do you mean?" "Children often sense biological relationships, or the lack thereof, on a subconscious level. It might explain why she's been pulling away, especially as she's gotten older and started thinking about her own identity and future." The thought hit me like a cold wind. Had Madeline been unconsciously rejecting me because some part of her knew I wasn't really her father? Had I been fighting a losing battle against biology itself? As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Sylvia. "Madeline wants to plan a family dinner this weekend. She feels bad about the birthday thing. Can you make it Saturday at 7? A family dinner. Another opportunity to sit at the edge of my own life, watching my wife and daughter bond while I played the role of the grateful outsider. But this time would be different. This time, I would be watching and listening with new purpose. Because if Patricia Hendricks found what I suspected she would find, Saturday's dinner might be the last time I pretended to be someone I wasn't. I texted back, "I'll be there." Then I drove to the pharmacy and bought a DNA test kit, identical to the one waiting on my kitchen counter. 2 tests, 2 chances to get definitive answers. By the time I got home, I had made a decision. I would wait for Patricia's investigation, but I wouldn't wait passively. It was time to start documenting everything, building a case file of my own. Because if 24 years of devotion had been built on a lie, then everyone involved was about to learn the true cost of deception. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I stood outside Sylvia's house, our former house, holding a bottle of wine and trying to remember when I'd started feeling like a guest in my own life. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd lived there, but somehow smaller. The garden I'd spent years cultivating was showing signs of neglect, and the front porch light flickered in a way that suggested the fixture I'd been meaning to replace for months still hadn't been fixed. Sylvia answered the door with the kind of smile she reserved for neighbors and acquaintances, polite but distant. At 56, she was still an attractive woman, her dark hair now streaked with silver she'd stopped trying to hide, her figure maintained through yoga classes and careful eating. "Douglas, right on time," she said, accepting the wine with a nod. "Madeline's in the kitchen." The house smelled like the rosemary chicken Madeline had learned to make in college, one of the few dishes she'd mastered well enough to serve to company. I followed Sylvia through the living room, noting the small changes, New throw pillows, a different arrangement of furniture, family photos that had been subtly edited to minimize my presence. Madeline looked up from the stove when I entered the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral. She'd inherited Sylvia's dark hair and delicate features, but her eyes were a striking green that neither Sylvia nor I possessed. I'd always assumed it was a recessive trait from somewhere in our family trees, but now that detail took on new significance. "Hey, Dad," she said, the words sounding forced. "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for inviting me," I replied, meaning it more than she could know. The dinner proceeded with the kind of stilted conversation that families have when they're trying too hard to be normal. Madeline talked about her job at the marketing firm. Sylvia discussed her book club and yoga classes, and I shared carefully edited updates about my work and apartment. But I was listening for more than just words. I was paying attention to the subtle dynamics, the way Madeline and Sylvia communicated with glances and half-finished sentences, the way they seemed to share an understanding that excluded me. "Remember when we went to that beach house in North Carolina?" Madeline said during dessert, laughing at some memory I couldn't quite place. "And Mom got so sunburned she couldn't move for 3 days?" Sylvia joined the laughter. "I looked like a lobster. You kept bringing me ice cubes wrapped in towels." "Where was I during this?" I asked, genuinely curious. The laughter stopped abruptly. Madeline and Sylvia exchanged a look. "You were working, I think," Sylvia said finally. "You had that big client presentation." But I remembered that vacation now, and I had been there for most of it. I'd been the one taking photos of Madeline building sandcastles, the one who'd driven to 3 different stores to find aloe vera for Sylvia's sunburn. Yet somehow, in their shared memory, I'd been absent. This was how it worked, I realized. Not through dramatic confrontations or conscious cruelty, but through the slow rewriting of history until I became a background character in my own family's story. After dinner, Madeline walked me to the door while Sylvia cleaned up in the kitchen. "Dad, I'm sorry about the birthday thing," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like you're not really present, like you're going through the motions." Going through the motions. The irony was breathtaking. "I understand," I said. "But I want you to know that I've always been present, Madeline. Maybe not in the way you needed, but I've always been here." She nodded, but I could see she didn't really understand what I meant. How could she? She'd grown up with a version of family where my role had been systematically diminished until even I had started to believe it. "I'm planning another get-together next weekend," she said as I reached my car. "Just a small thing with some friends. Maybe you could come? I promise it'll be better than last time." Another chance to be the grateful outsider, to sit on the periphery while she and her friends celebrated their real connections. "I'll think about it," I said. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Hendricks. "Found some interesting information. Can you come in Monday morning?" The next few days passed slowly. I completed the DNA test, carefully following the instructions and mailing the sample to the laboratory with expedited processing. I also began organizing my financial documents, updating my will, and reviewing the terms of various accounts and insurance policies. On Monday morning, I sat across from Patricia in her office, watching her arrange a thin folder of documents on her desk. "I found your wife's ex-boyfriend," she said without preamble. "Franklin Black, currently serving his 7th prison sentence for various crimes including fraud, theft, and assault. He was living with Sylvia for about 6 months before you two started dating seriously." She slid a photograph across the desk. The man in the picture had green eyes identical to Madeline's. "The timeline fits," Patricia continued. "Based on Madeline's birth date and the duration of a full-term pregnancy, conception would have occurred during the period when Sylvia was involved with Mr. Black." I stared at the photograph, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. "What else did you find?" Mr. Black has spent much of the last 25 years moving through the correctional system, substance-related offenses for the most part, along with some financial violations. He is currently serving a 10-year sentence for a serious theft carried out through intimidation. This is his third strike, so he won't be eligible for parole for at least 7 more years. She handed me a second document. This is his criminal record. As you can see, he's been incarcerated for significant portions of Madeline's childhood and adolescence. The record was extensive and depressing. Franklin Black was a career criminal who'd spent more time in prison than out of it, a man who'd never held a legitimate job for more than a few months, who'd left a trail of victims and broken relationships across 3 states. "There's something else," Patricia said. "I found evidence that Sylvia visited Mr. Black in prison twice in the last 5 years. Recent visits, well after you and Madeline were established as a family." The room felt like it was tilting. She visited him? The visitor logs are public record. She signed in under her maiden name, but the address and date of birth match. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. Sylvia had been in contact with Franklin Black while we were married, while she was raising the daughter he'd fathered but abandoned. "Mr. Carver," Patricia said gently, "there's one more thing you should know. Mr. Black has been writing letters from prison, letters requesting information about his daughter. He knows about Madeline? He's known for years, and based on the visitor logs and some other evidence I found, I believe Sylvia has been keeping him informed about Madeline's life. The betrayal was complete and devastating. Not only had I raised another man's child, but my wife had been secretly maintaining contact with that man, sharing information about the daughter I'd loved and supported for 24 years. I paid Patricia's final invoice and drove home in a daze. The DNA test results wouldn't arrive for another week, but I no longer needed them to confirm what I already knew. The pattern was clear, the evidence overwhelming. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. "Hey Dad, definitely want you to come to the party this weekend. It's at this cool loft downtown. Saturday at 8. Please say you'll be there." I stared at the message for a long time. Another opportunity to play the role of the grateful outsider, to pretend that everything was normal while my wife and daughter continued their elaborate deception. But this time would be different. This time, I would be the one controlling the narrative. I texted back, "I wouldn't miss it." Then I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter. Not an emotional outburst or a bitter accusation, but a careful, factual document that would lay out the truth with the same methodical precision I brought to financial analysis. By the time I finished, it was after midnight. The letter was 3 pages long, accompanied by copies of Franklin Black's criminal record, the visitor logs showing Sylvia's prison visits, and Patricia Hendricks' investigation report. I printed everything, placed it in a manila envelope, and wrote Madeline's name on the front in my careful handwriting. Saturday's party would indeed be different, because this time, instead of being erased from the story, I was going to rewrite the ending. The DNA test results arrived on Thursday morning, delivered in a plain white envelope that contained the power to officially confirm what I already knew. I opened it while drinking my morning coffee, reading the clinical language with the detached interest of a man reviewing someone else's financial portfolio. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Conclusion: Douglas Carver is excluded as the biological father of Madeline Carver. 24 years of devotion, reduced to a statistical impossibility. I photographed the results and added them to the growing file of documents I'd assembled over the past week. Franklin Black's criminal record, now updated with his most recent conviction. The prison visitor logs showing Sylvia's secret meetings, Patricia Hendricks' investigation report, bank statements showing the money I'd spent on Madeline's education, her car, her apartment deposit, her countless needs and wants over the years. But the most damaging evidence wasn't financial or biological, it was digital. I'd spent hours screenshotting social media posts, text messages, and photos that documented my systematic erasure from family events. The birthday party where my absence had been celebrated, the graduation photos that had been cropped to exclude me, the family dinners where I'd been present but invisible in the digital record. Each image told part of the story, but together they painted a picture of deliberate exclusion, of a family that had been slowly writing me out of their narrative while continuing to benefit from my financial support and emotional investment. On Friday afternoon, I made a final visit to my attorney, Ethan Foster, who had handled the legal aspects of my separation from Sylvia. Ethan was a few years younger than me, a sharp-minded lawyer who specialized in family law and estate planning. "Douglas," he said, reviewing the documents I'd brought, "this is significant. Are you certain you want to pursue this course of action?" "What would you do?" I asked. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying the DNA test results. "Honestly, I'd be furious. But fury doesn't always lead to the best legal strategy." "What are my options?" "Well, legally speaking, you have several avenues. You could sue for fraud, demand repayment of support provided under false pretenses, challenge any existing inheritance arrangements. But you should understand that this will effectively end your relationship with Madeline permanently." "My relationship with Madeline ended years ago," I replied. "I just didn't realize it at the time." Ethan nodded slowly. "In that case, let's talk about the trust fund." We spent an hour reviewing the terms of the Carver Family Trust, confirming what I'd already discovered. The biological descent requirement was ironclad, written by my father with the kind of legal precision that left no room for interpretation or challenge. "The trust can be modified," Ethan explained, "but only by the current beneficiary, which is you. If you want to remove Madeline and name a different heir, you have that right. What happens to the money if I don't name an heir?" "It would revert to the charitable foundation your father established as a backup beneficiary. The local children's hospital would receive the full amount." The irony was perfect. Money that Madeline had always assumed would be hers would instead go to help children who actually needed it, rather than funding the lifestyle of someone who'd spent years treating me like an inconvenience. "Draw up the paperwork," I said. "I want Madeline removed as beneficiary, effective immediately." "Douglas, once I file this, there's no taking it back. Are you absolutely certain?" I thought about Saturday morning's text from Madeline, the latest in a series of messages that had grown increasingly warm as the weekend approached. She was trying harder now, sensing perhaps that something had shifted in our dynamic, but her efforts felt hollow, motivated by obligation rather than genuine affection. "I'm certain." Ethan prepared the documents while I waited, occasionally asking questions about specific details. When he finished, I signed my name with the same careful precision my father had used when he'd originally established the trust. "The trust modification will be official as of Monday morning," Ethan said. "Madeline will have no legal claim to any of the money." As I drove home, my phone buzzed with another text from Madeline. "So excited for tomorrow night. I really want to make things right between us, Dad. This party is going to be special." Special. She had no idea how special it was going to be. I spent Friday evening making final preparations. I printed additional copies of all the documents, organized them in chronological order, and wrote a cover letter that summarized the key points with clinical precision. The letter began, "Madeline, for 24 years, I have loved you, supported you, and considered myself your father in every way that mattered. I attended your school plays, helped with your homework, paid for your education, and celebrated your achievements as if they were my own. I recently discovered that this relationship was built on a lie." The letter went on to detail the DNA test results, Franklin Black's criminal history, and Sylvia's secret prison visits. I explained the trust fund situation and the legal changes I'd made. I outlined the financial support I'd provided over the years and the systematic way I'd been excluded from family memories and celebrations. I ended with, "You have spent years treating me as an inconvenience while benefiting from my devotion and financial support. You celebrated my absence at your birthday party and referred to me as the old man, whose presence would have been a regret. Now you know the truth about your biological father and what that means for your future. I hope the freedom from my presence brings you the happiness you've been seeking. Douglas. I sealed everything in a large manila envelope and wrote Madeline's name on the front. Then I contacted a courier service and arranged for the envelope to be delivered to the loft where her party would be held, timed to arrive at 8:30 p.m. when the celebration would be in full swing. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Not happy, exactly, but free. Free from the exhausting effort of trying to maintain relationships with people who had already written me out of their lives. I spent the day organizing my apartment, updating my emergency contacts to remove Sylvia and Madeline, and transferring money from accounts they'd had access to into new accounts in my name only. At 8:15 p.m., I poured myself a glass of the good scotch and sat in my living room, imagining the scene that was about to unfold at the downtown loft. Madeline surrounded by her friends, probably wondering where I was, maybe even feeling a flicker of disappointment that I'd failed to show up again. At 8:30 p.m. exactly, my phone rang. The courier service confirming delivery. Package delivered to Madeline Carver at the downtown loft location, the driver reported. Signed for by the recipient. I thanked him and hung up, then settled back in my chair to wait. It didn't take long. At 8:47 p.m., my phone exploded with notifications. The first call came from Madeline, but I let it go to voicemail, then Sylvia, then Madeline again. Text messages began flooding in, each more frantic than the last. Dad, please call me. This can't be real. We need to talk, now. Please answer your phone. I ignored them all and poured myself another scotch, imagining the scene at the loft. Madeline opening the envelope in front of her friends, expecting perhaps a birthday card or a check. Instead, finding DNA test results and criminal records and the systematic documentation of her own cruelty. The courier had been instructed to deliver the envelope publicly, to hand it directly to Madeline while she was surrounded by her guests. No private moment to process the information, no opportunity to control the narrative or minimize the damage. My phone rang again. This time it was Brianna Foster, Madeline's best friend, the one who'd encouraged her to ignore me and keep dancing. I answered on the fourth ring. Mr. Carver? Her voice was shaky, uncertain. Madeline asked me to call you. She's really upset right now. I imagine she is, I replied calmly. She wants to know if this is some kind of joke. The DNA test and the criminal stuff, and is this real? Every document in that envelope is authentic and verifiable, I said. Your friend just learned that her biological father is a career criminal currently serving a 10-year sentence for armed robbery. She also learned that the trust fund she's been counting on for her future no longer exists, at least not for her. Silence on the other end. Then, But you raised her. You're her dad. I was never her father, Brianna. I was just a man who was deceived into thinking I was. And your friend spent years making it clear that my presence in her life was unwelcome. I simply decided to honor her wishes. Mr. Carver, please, she's crying and she wants to talk to you. Everyone here is really shocked and everyone there celebrated my absence at her birthday party, I interrupted. They encouraged her to ignore me, to treat me like an inconvenience. I assume they're getting exactly what they wanted. I hung up and turned off my phone. For the next hour, I sat in my quiet apartment, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but the deep calm that comes from finally telling the truth after decades of living a lie. Around 10 p.m., I heard a car door slam outside my building, followed by the sound of someone running up the stairs, heavy knocking on my door, then Sylvia's voice calling my name. I didn't answer. The knocking continued for several minutes, accompanied by pleas and explanations and promises. I heard fragments through the door. Can explain everything. Made mistakes, but she loves you. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I heard footsteps retreating down the stairs, then the sound of a car driving away. The next morning, I found a handwritten letter that had been slipped under my door. Sylvia's careful script, 3 pages of explanations and justifications, and desperate attempts to minimize the damage. She admitted to the affair with Franklin Black. She admitted to hiding Madeline's true parentage. She admitted to the prison visits, claiming she'd only gone to make sure he would never try to contact Madeline. "I was trying to protect her," she wrote, "and I was trying to protect you. You were such a good father to her, better than Franklin could ever have been. I thought if you never knew, it wouldn't matter. Please don't punish Madeline for my mistakes. She's innocent in all of this." Innocent. That was an interesting word choice for someone who'd spent years systematically excluding me from her life while benefiting from my financial support. I threw the letter away without finishing it. On Monday morning, I received confirmation that the trust modification had been filed and was now legally binding. Madeline was no longer a beneficiary of the Carver family trust. The $2.8 million that she'd been counting on for her future would instead go to the Children's Hospital, where it would help kids who actually needed it. I also received a final report from Patricia Hendricks, containing additional information about Franklin Black's criminal history and current incarceration. The man had been arrested 17 times, convicted 12 times, and had never held a legitimate job for longer than 6 months. He'd fathered at least 3 other children with different women, none of whom he'd ever supported. This was Madeline's true heritage. Not the stable, middle-class legacy I'd worked to build, but a pattern of crime and abandonment and failure. That afternoon, I received one final text message from Madeline. "Dad, I know I hurt you and I'm sorry. I know I took you for granted and treated you badly, but please don't let that destroy our relationship. You're the only father I've ever known. Can we please talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the little girl who'd once fallen asleep in my lap during bedtime stories, who'd run to me when she scraped her knee, who'd hugged me tight on her first day of school. But that little girl had grown into a woman who celebrated my absence and called me the old man and treated my love like an obligation she resented. I deleted the message without responding. 3 weeks later, I received a wedding invitation from my neighbor's daughter, a young woman I'd watched grow up in the apartment building. She was marrying her college boyfriend, and they'd asked me to officiate the ceremony since I'd gotten ordained online years ago for a friend's wedding. As I stood in the small chapel, watching 2 people who genuinely loved and respected each other promise to build a life together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not for reconciliation with the family that had betrayed me, but for the possibility of building new relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. After the ceremony, the bride hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for making our day so special, Mr. Carver. You're like the father I always wished I had." Like the father she always wished she had. For the first time in months, I smiled. The envelope I'd sent to Madeline's party had contained more than just documents and DNA test results. It had contained the truth about who we really were to each other, stripped of illusions and pretense. She had wanted freedom from the old man who embarrassed her and cramped her style. I had given her exactly what she'd asked for. And for the first time in 24 years, I was exactly where I belonged, free from people who had never truly wanted me, surrounded by those who appreciated what I had to offer. The truth, as it turned out, really had set us both free. The envelope hit the floor of the downtown loft with a soft thud, its contents scattered across the polished concrete as Madeline's friends stared in stunned silence. DNA test results, criminal records, bank statements, and prison visitor logs lay exposed under the party lights like evidence at a crime scene. Madeline stood frozen, her face pale, as the room erupted in shocked whispers and the flash of cell phone cameras capturing the moment her carefully constructed world collapsed. And in his quiet apartment across town, Douglas Carver raised his glass of scotch in a silent toast to the truth.